similarities and differences between things. How could that be helpful? Why show how things are similar?
You're trying to persuade somebody to choose one.
All right, great. So you could be trying to persuade somebody to choose one over the other. We see a lot of that in the news right now with the upcoming elections. There's a lot of comparing and contrasting between the different candidates to try to persuade you of who to choose and who to vote for. Okay, what else? Okay. Now when we compare and contrast, what kind of things can we compare and contrast? What can we compare or contrast? What kinds of things?
Objects, situations.
Objects, situations.
People.
People. Pretty much everything, couldn't we? Okay. Now, when we do this, there are some different reasons why we do this, okay? One of them, I think I've used this example before. How many people in this classroom are familiar with the sport cricket? Few. How many are familiar with baseball or softball? Okay. So if I just start talking about cricket, not many of you are really going to understand. But if we build on baseball or softball that you are familiar with and compare it from there, then it's going to force you to have some common ground. Do you remember back to the I Have a Dream speech that we talked about? He does this he talks about what his dream is. I have a dream for my children to be able to live in a world of equality. And he contrasts that with how the state of the world actually is. And so we get this common ground and we know how things are and how we want them to be. And then he builds on that to persuade us to change. Okay? So you can build on common ground. Is there anything else we can show when we're comparing and contrasting?
Difference in the ground.
Yeah, you show differences. Sometimes they're unexpected differences, aren't they? So it may be two things that seem really similar and the same, but we're going to show how they actually are different. Okay? What kind of situations can we use this in? Okay, who ever goes grocery shopping? How many of you have ever looked at the nutrition label or the ingredients list? How many of you have looked at the little price thing on the shelf? Maybe you think, oh, I normally buy this brand, but the other brand's on sale for 50 cents cheaper, I'm going to try it. Or you think, oh, I really like Lucky Charms, but they've got 70 grams of sugar per serving. Maybe I should go with something else. Okay? So it's a real life thing where we're comparing and contrasting all the time. Okay? Now, if we're writing a comparison and contrast paper, how can we organize it? What kind of structure can we use?
Maybe first talk about how they're alike, then talk about how they're different.
Yeah. So if you're doing both one paper, you can have an intro, and then you can talk about how they're alike, how they're different, and then obviously have a conclusion. Okay, what's the advantage of organizing like this? Anything good about organizing this way?
It's not really confusing because I follow likes to be one triangle.
Yeah, it's really clear, it's easy to see. Here's all the alikes, here's all the differences. Now the hard thing can be, how do you transition this? Suddenly switching gears from here's everything that's like to everything different. So the pro is that it's very, very clear, easy to understand, but it can make the transition and the flow of your paper a little bit more difficult to do. Okay, what's another way we would you organize it?
Like a graph or chart?
Okay. Yeah, so you could put it in a visual. And you're right, there are a lot of graphs and charts that do this. Venn diagrams, you've probably all seen. That's what these do. So you have this area of similarities, and then the unique traits. This would be really easy to do. For example, you all chose to come to Roane State, even though there are a lot of other colleges around. So here's similar things with like Tennessee Tech. They're in similar areas, similar price tag, similar colleges. Okay. Differences might be what programs they offer, different extracurricular activities, that kind of thing. So yeah. Okay. Within a paper, how can we organize a paper with it?
Talk about one item, talk about how they're alike, and talk about the other item.
Yeah, so you can do. So we're always going to have an intro. So you could have item A, talk about everything about item A, and then do item B, and have everything about item B, and then have the conclusion. So you can tell us all about one and then all about the other, and then tie it together. The easy thing about this is you've got it all in one place. So everything, if I'm talking about Roane State versus Tennessee Tech, everything I'm going to say about Roane State is right here. What's the disadvantage to this?
It's hard to keep them separated if you're like comparing them, and it's hard to keep them separated in the same place.
Okay. And it can be hard. I mean, in this case, we're putting, we could put all of Roane State here. And all of Tennessee Tech. So I think you're looking at a different way as well. So here it can be hard because by the time you've written about everything about Roane State and then talk about everything about Tennessee Tech, you might forget what your points were up here. So it's not as obvious the similarities and differences when they're not right up next to each other. Okay? Same thing, like even in this classroom, if you look right up there at that casing and then this screen, what color are they both?
White.
White. Are they the same color? No. If you have them not next to each other, you just look at them both and say white, but they're not quite the same, are they? But it takes being right next to each other to be able to see that. Okay? So this can be nice, but it takes away the power of having them right next to each other. Okay? Now the other thing you can do is do all of your certain points and do this. So you can have, whatever your first point is, and then discuss them both in it. So you could have point 1 be majors, and then talk about Roane State, and then talk about Tennessee Tech. And then go on to extracurricular activities and talk about them both under it. So it's divided up by a paragraph, and you cover them both in one paragraph. Okay? Now, depending on what you're writing, what your topic is, and how long what you're writing is, you might choose to use a different one of these. And you can even use more than one on one paper in a longer piece. So for example, this style is very effective in very short things, where you say all of how it's like and all of how it's different. It's going to be great if you're writing something very short, but in a sustained paper, it tends to lose its effect. Whereas in a longer paper, something like this, where you go through the similarities and differences one point at a time, tends to work better if it's a longer piece. So you can choose more than one type of structure depending on what you're doing. Okay? Now the other thing about comparison and contrast, like all the other types of writing that we've done, is that you have to keep a purpose in mind. So you're not just doing this for the sake of it. There has to be a reason for it. And when you're writing about it, you have to think of what your purpose is. Are you trying to persuade people that one is better than the other? Are you trying to inform us, to entertain us? You have to think about what that purpose is, why you would be comparing these things. Okay? Real world application. Okay? Let's say you're going out to buy a car. How are you going to choose which car to buy? Yeah, you're going to compare it with other cars. How does it drive? How many miles does it have? Maybe if you like the color better. Has it ever been in an accident? How much does it cost to insure? All those kinds of things. Okay? So in that case, your purpose in comparing and contrasting is to pick which one's better for you to buy right now. Okay, so you need to keep that purpose in mind. You should have all read in your Prentice Hall Reader about these already. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that it says quickly. Begins on page 266. Okay. So I like that it says it's to reveal similarities and differences, but it talks about how you have to pick what you're doing and not try to cover everything. That some things are obvious and not worth writing about. Okay. So if, for example, you're comparing cars, you don't have to say they both have tires, and they both have an engine, and they both have a steering wheel, because you can take that for granted. You realize those are inherent to being a car. You're only going to pick on the points that are most pressing, okay? And you want to compare and contrast things to reveal something unexpected. Something that you might not have realized without this comparison. Okay? It also points out, so it talks about the organization again, which we talked about. Okay. And I like that it says, in its little revising tips on page 277, it says, assess the significance in your approach. Don't waste your reader's time. Okay? So you should be able to read your paper and ask yourself the question, so what? And have an answer to it. Okay? It says experiment with your paper's organizational strategy. So let's say you start writing like this, and it looks great on your outline, and then when you start actually writing your rough draft, you realize it's not working very well. You can switch the organization type. Okay? And it talks about the importance of the introduction and conclusion. Okay? Because this is where it's going to become really apparent what you're comparing and why it's important, why this comparison matters. Okay, think of it just like movies. If you go to a great movie and the ending is horrible, what are you going to say when you walk out of the movie theater?
Horrible movie.
It's a horrible movie. Might have been great up to the last 10 minutes. But if you hate that ending, you're going to walk out and say it was a horrible movie. Okay, same thing goes with your essay. If you have a great comparison, and then all of a sudden it just ends and there's no conclusion, your reader's going to go, it just ends. This is a horrible paper. But if you have a great conclusion that ties all your ideas together, it's going to strengthen your argument and leave your reader thinking about it. And it's going to work to inform them, to persuade them to do these things that you wanted to do. So you need to think about that. And finally, you should have had this on your other, is you want a good title. It's going to be reflective of your essay. It should be more than just a comparison and contrast of. Okay, you want a title that's really going to reveal something about your take to it. Okay? Now, if you remember last class period, I told you we were going to have a guest lecture. So, we're going to have something a bit different now. Got Lindsay here to guest lecture. Please pay attention, this is going to be important. I'm going to turn the camera over to her, and then afterwards we will do your next assignment.